sustainable trade and the possible momentums for FLEGT in this. We live on the same planet in a globalized world. There are countries the countries are interacting with each other in a very, very complex way. The COVID-19 pandemic has really shown a light on this. And it has especially shown how fragile and the global trade system can be and how integrated supply chains are. This would not be seen as a sign to close our economies or to act protectionist. On the contrary, my view is that we need to use globalization to make us use the resources in a much more efficient way to create growth and prosperity. But we need to make sure that supply chains and global trade are made more sustainable and more resilient. Today's situation with a pandemic must be used as an opportunity to promote sustainable trade, which brings both prosperity and helps the green transition. There is a lot of talk about how to do this in the national parliaments, as we know, and also in the European Parliament. And this is good, but we also need action. From my point of view, as a politician, I see a need for both international cooperation and for better regulatory frameworks. On one part of this is the FLEGT framework. It will, of course, not solve how we make all trade sustainable, but to me, it's a crucial building block, not only to make sure that the EU takes a bigger responsibility in reducing deforestation and forest degradation, but also to serve as an example of how we can work in EU together with our trading partners to make trade sustainable. FLEGT is a strategy aiming to promoting sustainable supply chains and sustainable forestry. It's a system which attacks the issue from two angles. Firstly, the EU is working together with timber producing countries to combat illegal forestry. This is done through capacity building and by strengthening institution and management in the exporting country. Also, and equally important, FLEGT creates incentives and systems to promote sustainable forestry, and it decreases the actual demand for products of unsustainable forestry in the European Union. It's estimated that the EU consumption and production is responsible for 10% of illegal loggings worldwide. 10%. For the EU to step up the engagement on global forestry is of very high importance. As a big importer of forest products and other at-risk commodities, the EU has a big potential to take on a leading role globally and to inspire others as well. Ideally, we do wish that all other timber importing countries would also step up and take responsibility, of course. There is room for widen the FLEGT licensing system to include or work with systems of other importing countries rather than just the European Union. We want the EU to talk to our partners that also important these products to make sure that licensed products get preferential access to more markets. The demand for products of unsustainable forestry need to decrease globally. This would be a very important future step of FLEGT. I would like to add that we need to introduce an EU system, preferably modeled on FLEGT, to go beyond only timber products and cover also at-risk products. Trade with these at-risk products will continue as long as there is a demand, we know. And this is the root of the problem and where action needs to be taken. I have to say that all this, it's basically about cooperation. The EU and other global actors need to both focus and together with companies, with the business sector, the companies exporting products, which drive deforestation. And we have to work with governments in exporting countries, of course. Illegal forestry is often a phenomenon seen where governments are undemocratic, corrupt, or with weak enforcement. Those the EU is, as is done through the FLEGT system, also needs to promote democracy, efficient government, rule of law, and strong institutions, as well as human rights in third countries. And actually, this helps not only to reduce illegal forestry, but also strengthen the capacity of these countries to build better institutions, which also benefit the country in general and are crucial for growth and development. In the end, democracy is the base for sustainable development. FLEGT was first launched in 2003, which means that it actually has been around for some time now. The problems we faced in 2003 are different from the situation today, and the political landscape has changed dramatically. Now we have the Paris Agreement, and most governments across the world are aware of the actual climate crisis. So now we really need to adapt our system to the current situation and use the fact that there now is a political will to change the way things are done. But to do, we need far-reaching discussions and constant evaluation by politicians, by business, by researchers, and by civil society, which plays such an important role in this. With that being said, thank you to everyone who will take part and share your thoughts and experience today. I wish you all welcome to the discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to what will come out of this. I'm looking forward to an extremely interesting and inspiring afternoon on this subject. Thank you so much.
Merci, Karen. Thank you very much, Karen. We're really delighted to have you as a host for this webinar. We would like, again, to thank you for hosting this discussion on the role of FLEGT in a green recovery from COVID-19. We are also extremely delighted to have such a great panel today. And we thank again all the speakers who are joining us from different regions and across sometimes very difficult time zones, because it's quite late in Indonesia right now and very early in Honduras. So a special thanks to the representative of the Indonesian and Honduran governments to spare their time to share insights on the situation in their country and the impact of COVID-19 on the forest sector and their VPA process. I have to say that this event is being co-organized with a number of fellow NGOs, including CIDT, EIA, and WRI, and we're really grateful for their valuable contribution and collaboration. Je vais maintenant parler en français puisque nous avons également pas mal de participants qui viennent de pays francophones. Et peut-être que Léa Turunen, la modératrice de l'événement, aura aussi l'occasion de dire quelques mots en espagnol pour les participants hispanophones. Donc l'idée du séminaire a vraiment germé lorsqu'au début de la pandémie, un certain nombre de nos partenaires qui travaillent dans des pays APV nous ont...
Many countries came to us and reported that there were major issues in the countries because of illegal logging, and also a major pressure on the resources. And this was detrimental to the local populations because they were between the confinement measures and the pressure on their forests. So this was violating the VPA with the different countries that were signed with the European Union. Today we have more information on the consequences of the pandemics and the implementation of the FLEGT. Through this webinar, we want to have a discussion between the social society, the European Union, and the private sector. We want to discuss on the measures that we have to take and to implement in order to have a green recovery and also to respect the different objectives of the Green Deal of the European Union. We really think that FLEGT culture has a role to play in the geographical and the political aspect of the new Green Deal, and the civil society should play a role. They should be monitoring and defending the local communities and indigenous people. So once again, thank you to you all. I would like to thank all the participants too that are connected from all over the world to participate in this meeting, and we really are looking forward to the different discussions we will have, and we hope they will be useful for the debates that are taking place at the European level. We want to challenge and we want to struggle against deforestation. And I will now give the floor to Anna.
Thank you, Karin and Marie-Ange, and good afternoon to everybody who has joined this webinar. Y en castellano, bienvenidos a todos los participantes de la América Latina. Unas palabras en su idioma también.
Welcome to all participants from Latin America.
A couple of house rules. Our webinar will consist of 2 panels, and both will be followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. You can send your questions to the panelists throughout the webinar via the Q&A box. The host will follow the Q&A box and pick up the questions of general interest. I will then ask the panelists to answer those during the Q&A, and all the other remarks and questions that we may not have time for during this webinar will be sent to the panelists and will be answered after the webinar. Besides the Q&A box, which we hope to reserve for those questions, there will be a chat window open during the discussion times as well. So please use the chat window for comments, sharing of resources, or internal discussions. The organizers will record the meeting and save the presentations, and everything will be available later on. After those basic house rules, it's time now to introduce to you our panelists. The first panel will be opened by Dr. Agus Justianto, Director General of the Forestry and Environment Research, Development and Innovation Agency within the Ministry of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia. He has dedicated his career to forestry within the ministry since 1986. Thereafter, we have Mr. Obed Owusu Adai, co-founder and managing campaigner from an NGO EcoCare Ghana. He will share lessons from the VPA process during these COVID-19 times in his country. Ms. Chantal Marinissen, Head of Unit for Environment, Natural Resources, Water in DG DEFCO at the European Commission, will conclude the first panel. Prior to her current position, she has held a number of senior positions at the Commission on development effectiveness, among other topics. After the Q&A, we have in the second panel, Mr. Benoit Jobet-Duval, providing us with a private sector perspective. He is the Executive Director of Association Technique Internationale des Bois Tropicaux, ATIBT, which is an association particularly involved in the timber industry in the forest countries of the Congo Basin and West Africa. We also have the honor to have with us Mr. Francisco Javier Escalante, Vice Minister of Forest Development of the Forest Conservation Institute of Honduras. He is the technical focal point of the FLEGT VPA process and will be talking about their experiences. Orlin Nyeke and Esilot Lubala will together talk about independent forest monitoring in times of crisis. Orlin is the Secretary General of Field Legality Advisory Group, a civil society organization based in Cameroon working across the Central Africa region. Esilot is the founding member and the coordinator of l'Observatoire de la Gouvernance Forestière, which is a civil society organization in charge of independent forest monitoring in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. The second panel will be closed by Daphne Hewitt, Senior Forestry Officer in FAO and Team Leader for the FAO EU FLEGT program. Before opening the panel, I would like to remind our speakers of the tight agenda we have today. So my apologies if I will have to gently nudge you to conclude your presentations if you go past the agreed time. And now, without further ado, I will give the floor to our first panelist from Indonesia, Mr. Director General. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Leah. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. Yeah, I would like to present. Okay. Yeah, I would like to present the presentation entitled "The Regulation and How to Tighten Checks in the Time of Crisis." Next. Next, please. Yes, as the urgency of tackling of the pandemic took center stage, policy issues such as the implementation of FLEGT action plan and VPAs move into the background. Indonesia has also to cope with a tough choice to balance the health and welfare of its citizens with keeping its commitments to maintain and improve forest governance and trade. This presentation will show how Indonesia has addressed these challenges. Next, please. Yeah, regarding the regulation of forestry sector in Indonesia, following up the government regulation on concerning electronically integrated business licensing, as well as presidential instruction concerning accelerating the issues of doing business, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry has taken the following measures. First, identifying and reviewing regulation that impede the easiness of doing business and investing. And then reducing number of stages, simplifying procedures and conditions, as well as accelerating the issuance of business licenses. And then delegate authority for business license to Indonesia Investment Coordinating Board, and creating a task force to accelerate business license in forestry sector and to liaise with the BKPN. The government and the House representative finalized the job creation Omnibus Law. Next, please. Indonesia policies in the era of pandemic, as we know that Indonesia keeps the forestry sector as stable as possible by ensuring the operation of forestry businesses through, among others, relaxing some procedures, delaying loan repayment, extending grace period, optimizing state budget, and prioritizing labor-intensive activities through forest rehabilitation and social forestry programs. The forest rehabilitation program has absorbed labor from the surrounding community in the amount of 20 million working days. And then in the social forestry program, we have already issued more than 6,600 units of social forestry licenses covering more than 850,000 households, and then apply e-learning to our forest farmers, and to provide incentive which would be given to farmer groups if they implement the e-learning outcomes in their business work plan by selecting a cluster of forest and food commodities that can be used to provide production inputs such as seed, fertilizer, and pesticides. In ensuring the sustainability of timber trade, focusing on maintaining timber legality verification system and assisting SMEs to comply with the system, especially in this difficult time. Next, please. We do also the forest law enforcement, although in the time of crisis, law enforcement to protect forests from crimes is still consistently conducted. These figures show how Indonesia deals with the law enforcement. For example, dealing with the illegal logging, we still do law enforcement in this illegal logging, and also regarding the forest area encroachment, illegal wildlife trade, and we do also administrative sanction and civil law and criminal law. Next, please. There are at least 3 benefits from the application of the Omnibus Law, as I mentioned. That is eliminating overlaps between laws and regulation, the efficiency of the change, revocation of legislation, and then eliminating sectoral egos contained in various laws and regulation. The substance of the law includes simplification of licensing, investment requirement, employment, ease, empowerment, and protection of small and medium businesses, ease of doing business, research and innovation support, government administration, imposition of sanctions and land acquisition, and then government investment and project and economic area. Next, please. Regarding the forest product trade, especially on timber, the implementation of timber legality assurance system, we call it the SVLK, has implication for improving forest governance in Indonesia, including in terms of improving the level of transparency and availability of public information, the deregulation of licensing in the regions, applying enhanced management practices, and achieving improved compliance. MSMEs has also been required to participate in the SVLK since 2013. And then the local government play an important role in promoting the acceleration of the implementation of the SVLK. And also the effectiveness of the system has also been recognized by the international community as evidenced by interest of number of countries in studying or conducting comparative studies of the system, including from China, Laos, Myanmar, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Ghana, and Japan. Next, please. Concerning monitoring and maintaining the implementation of SVLK, in this time of crisis, Indonesia's commitment to the implementation of SVLK and the FLEGT VPA remains strong. Indonesia is in the process for improving policies and regulation to support the continuation of SVLK, in particular to assist micro, small, and medium enterprises in timber and wood sector, especially to the furniture industries, to stay in the business and to increase their export. And then the improvement of regulation will ease micro, small, and medium enterprises to obtain SVLK certification, including support for capacity building and assessment process to get proof of legality. Next, as a concluding remark, I inform you that the President of Indonesia urgently calls the cabinet to formulate the strategy and operating plan to address COVID-19 pandemic, to control the spread of the pandemic, to manage the socio-economic recovery for the community in particular, and to prevent stagnant production. Under the presidential decree supported by the parliament through in the law number 2/2020, Indonesia set priority to control the COVID-19 pandemic and to cope with its implication in the economic downturn, conferring the domains of health, for example, to support the infrastructure, facility system, and support to medical officer. And then we have social safety agenda for food subsidy for household on electricity, labor-intensive work, and then production support for smallholders and small-scale enterprises on financial capital, tax reduction, and the government also gives incentive for private sector, particularly on taxes. Private sector also has an important role in supporting effort to address the COVID-19 pandemic, such as maintain the gross national product, relieve distress in the community through forest healing within the COVID-19 protocol on ecotourism for limited access to national park, and maintain the welfare of wildlife by supplying feed, and enhance forest protection by intensive patrol involving local community to prevent forest encroachment. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director General. And we move straight ahead to the next panelist, Mr. Obed Owusu Adai. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Yeah, my Great. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the lessons that we've learned from the VPA process during this COVID-19 era. I will begin the presentation. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, next slide. I'll look at three areas. When I was given this topic, I looked at several things. How do I respond to these issues, and how do I avoid talking about specifics and talk about the holistic things that is happening within the sector? So I asked myself three questions, and I'll attempt to address those three questions within this 7 minutes I've been given. So what forest management governance issues or management or governance issues has COVID-19 uncovered within this 11 or 10 months that has been around? And how is the VPA process designed, especially in the context of Ghana, to address some of these issues that are coming up, are being raised by COVID-19?
Pour faire face à ces différentes questions qui sont soulevées par le Covid et quelles sont les perspectives?
What do we expect? Can we go to the next slide? Yes. In answering these questions, the first issue about forest management and the issues that forest management and governance and the kind of issues that COVID-19 has raised, you realize that we have, through our engagement as civil society, working with communities, we've realized that forest management must be a shared responsibility. If nothing at all, what this COVID-19 has shown us with respect to forest management and governance is that the Forestry Commission or the legally mandated persons cannot always be on the ground to address the problems on the ground, and that you need communities and people that stay close to the forest to support in managing the forest. So the restrictive approach to forest management that has happened for a very long time alienates communities from this protection role that they play, and that has been evident in some of the things that are happening at the community level when forest managers are not on the ground and certain illegal operators are in the forest and they are doing illegality. So that is the first issue that this COVID-19 has uncovered from our engagements with communities and being part of the process. The second issue is the need to develop a stronger domestic market for forest products. I was in a webinar a couple of months ago with one of the directors of a timber company in Ghana, and he did confess that this COVID pandemic has led to decline in their timber exports. Certain percentages, 25% export, 37% revenue drop, and all that. And so we realized that we need to develop an internal market. And whilst there is a problem with the export market, there was a demand for timber on the domestic market. When you go to our domestic market, you realize that there were no timber products there, and people needed the product, but companies were waiting for export. And so it also unraveled that kind of a mystery or a problem that we need to develop a stronger domestic market for our forest products. The other issue that this COVID-19 has uncovered is the need for forest management to integrate technology. Now, when forest managers cannot be on the ground, they need to still continue doing their protection roles. The use of drones and other things are a possible source of protecting the forest when there is a crisis like we have it now. Because currently they are not on the ground because of restrictions that were put on movement of people, and the illegalities or the illegal operators, they did not care. They were still going around doing some of the things that they've been doing. And because the forest managers were not around, that also created a problem. And probably the last thing, a very controversial thing that this has uncovered is that the politician cannot always be trusted. And I say this within the context that before we got to where we are in the COVID pandemic, we had gotten, especially Ghanaian stakeholders, had reached a consensus on the roadmap for addressing some of the issues within the FLEGT VPA process. But we realized that politicians and the political elite are using the pandemic as an excuse to relent on the commitments that they made. And so these are a few of the issues that the COVID-19 has unraveled. And we feel the design of VPA. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Yeah, great. And we feel that the design of the VPA has been designed in such a way that it's able to address some of these issues that are emerging. For example, the VPA embraces multi-stakeholder approach to forest governance and management. So through the VPA, a lot of consultation and community involvement were done. And so most of the communities in the forest range areas are now educated to be able to protect the forest. But because of a long years of restrictive management that has been put there, it makes it difficult for them to do so. There is an opportunity not only for Ghana's FLEGT VPA, but for other VPAs to try and use the multi-stakeholder approach in addressing some of these emerging issues. The other thing is that it empowers, the VPA empowers communities to want to protect the forest because they stand to gain benefits from it. And for example, in the context of Ghana, for a long time, communities were not benefiting from social responsibility agreements and other things. But with the FLEGT VPA discussions and what is happening, communities have now realized that there is a need to protect the forest, because when they protect, they get benefit from it. Their rights are protected by being part of the management processes. The other issue is about domestic restructuring. Inherent in Ghana's VPA is an attempt to restructure the domestic market. And we have failed. We have seen in this COVID-19 era that it is very, very important to complete that process, to develop a very good domestic market, which is dealing in legal timber, promoting the consumption of legal timber, so that when there is a problem like the COVID-19 and we cannot access international market, we will still have a very good market domestically to consume the timber products. The other issue is that the legality assurance system, as designed, ensures that there is proper chain of custody of timber. So whilst forest managers and those who are mandated to protect the forest are unable to go to the ground, the systems that were put in place by the FLEGT, the TILAS process, is working to the extent that you cannot harvest timber without the necessary documentation, without the necessary chain of custody, demonstrating the chain of custody. And we have realized that the VPA is very, very capable of addressing some of these challenges within the forestry sector, as brought upon us by COVID-19. Then the final point I want to make under this is that VPA minimizes physical contacts by introducing digital wood tracking system. In Ghana's process, we are now using digitalized systems to try and take data of trees, monitor the movement of cars, timber trucks, and all that. And we feel it is very, very important, especially within this COVID-19 era, where we are all trying to minimize contact with people, social distancing, and all that. So these are some of the designs within the VPA architecture that helps in addressing some of the problems uncovered by the pandemic. And to finish off, I will go to my final slide and look at what is the outlook for post-COVID-19 in a VPA country like Ghana. We have seen the problem that it has uncovered, the potential of VPA to address it. But how does the future look? Mostly after crisis, there is a overdependence on resources. And so we are a bit more skeptical that after this COVID-19, there will be a potential surge in illegal timber logging. How do we ensure that harvesting is done within the prescribed limits? How do we protect culturally sensitive areas? Because companies are losing a lot of resources, and there will be an attempt to overexploit to make up for the losses that they've gained. How do we put structures in place through the VPA process to address some of these things? Then the other issue is, how do we safeguard the interests of forest-dependent communities, especially when it comes to benefit sharing and social responsibility agreements? Mostly when after crisis, people tend to not obey the law and do their own thing. So we are drawing attention that after this crisis, there is the need to ensure that community interests, community rights are still protected under the FLEGT VPA architecture. The last 2 points are, how do we ensure that illegal forest exploitation doesn't become the means to recover from the COVID-19? Like I made initially, we need to put structures in place. And I believe the FLEGT VPA has a very, very important architecture that will that can minimize the happening of this particular overexploitation. But there need to be commitment from government, from civil society, and from the industry itself. And of course, the Forestry Commission also needs to be committed. Funny enough, over the past 10, 11 months, we have realized that there seems to be a lack of inertia both at the government level and even with some of the departments, and they've not been very proactive in doing some of the commitments that were made under the FLEGT VPA. And we need to move forward in trying to use the FLEGT, because we've seen that it's a very well-structured architecture that can minimize overexploitation of timber. Then the last point I want to make before I wrap up is that there's a need for continuous engagement with all stakeholders using existing multi-stakeholder platforms. We've realized that because of the COVID-19, certain stakeholder consultation that needed to happen were not happening. And because of that, a lot of the VPA processes became stagnant and they were not moving forward. But after the COVID-19, we need to go back to the table and make sure that we are using these systems and structures that were designed under the FLEGT VPA to encourage multi-stakeholder dialogue and to encourage solving problems within the forest governance and management architecture. And so these are some of the very few things that we have learned over the past 11 and 10 months when the COVID-19 came, and how we think the FLEGT VPA is structured to be able to address some of these problems that the COVID-19 has uncovered. And on that note, I will end my presentation.
Thank you, Obed. We need to move forward. Very interesting. We might have some questions for you. Now moving to the last panelist of this first panel, I hand over to Chantal from the European Commission. Chantal, do we have you with us?
Hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I was trying to put a Swifty microphone on and it didn't work. I was talking to myself and thanking the previous panelists and telling you that you may be hearing some similar comments from my side, because we tend to agree on the benefits of on FLEGT from what I was hearing Obed saying. Maybe a few words first to start on the on COVID-19, the global response package that we pulled together on the 8th of April. To say that you know, we've secured 15 billion to help partners both in the short, medium, and long term, and it's really adapted to their needs. On the sort of immediate needs, we've redirected some of our biodiversity programs to help mainly high value ecosystems and the vulnerable people that very often live around them. But we're also working with other tools like guarantees, budget support to provide liquidity to governments, blending to be able to support the private sector and in particular all the small and medium-sized enterprises that are so important for securing jobs. Obviously, we've continued having policy dialogue with our partners. And this goes from talking about and explaining the Green Deal. Obviously, we continue on human rights and democracy as we have done in the past. Now, maybe just 2 words, I'm sure you're all aware of it, but we adopted last December the EU Green Deal, which is really our blueprint to transform the European economy in a sustainable and just way. And the idea is to leave nobody behind and also no place behind. And as previous speakers said, there was always the worry that, you know, with the economic impact of COVID, we may abandon these ideas, but it's been made very, very clear by our president that the Green Deal is in fact our compass for a green recovery, because we really think this is an opportunity to build back better and to address longer term challenges that are linked to pandemics and also, of course, zoonotic diseases, which are the main sort of source of new illnesses that we've seen arising. So we know that we need to take a one health approach for the future if we want to avoid future pandemics. Now, maybe coming back to FLEGT and VPAs, and I'm afraid here you may hear some repetition. We also believe that the design and the scope of the FLEGT and its focus on legality can provide a means to address the expanding informal sector, people that may be returning from urban areas to their villages, or the formal forest sector that's impacted by the COVID-19. In particular, we think that the VPAs can help because they ensure governance is maintained, and we have all the systems in place to to keep it maintained in the long run. And as it was said, we are also a bit worried that there could be a cutting corners. So that this is one of the ways that we can see, keeping it, keeping the governance going, making sure that we're providing a better environment for more compliant and competitive private sector. But we also see it as a way to reboost the forest sector by modernizing, simplifying, speeding up administrative processes, and to push development and implementation of sustainable forest management plans for all the operators. So making sure that we're enhancing environmental sustainability. And the other thing that we shouldn't forget is it's also a way to ensure that taxes can be collected by improving compliance, which means that governments have the funds and their own funds to invest then in their own green economy, to be able to better address deforestation, to support local communities and their livelihoods in a way that reduces the pressures on forests. Now, if I come back to what I was saying about the 15 billion euro package that we put together for addressing COVID, I think we want to make it very, very clear that we didn't redirect any programs that address and support the FLEGT, because we see the FLEGT as really being part of the medium and longer term recovery package. So we really want to continue what we're doing as we are. And I think we've got some really good messages, because despite all of the difficulties that we're having because of COVID, the fact that we can't have missions to partner countries, it doesn't mean that we haven't been, we've stopped all of our work. I think the minister from Honduras can confirm that we're finalizing the agreement on Honduras, and I'm talking about getting it, squeaky clean for signing and ratification. We've also been discussing it with MEP Karlsbro. So, we're going forward on this aspect, but we're also negotiating with the Ivory Coast, and it's going quite well. We're helping with the legal reforms that need to be taken place in the Ivory Coast. Obviously, it's the one that I know better of the two VPAs under negotiation, as I'm the chief negotiator, but we're also negotiating in Thailand. My counterpart in DG Environment is in the lead there. And we're holding virtual JICs in Vietnam in June, for instance. There'll be a GEM in Laos, well, there was in September. So, and we're doing a pre-JIC in Guyana now that the new government is in place. So, we haven't stopped. And also we've got good news, because Gabon has shown interest again. So we're going to do a joint review with them to see if a VPA would be the most appropriate approach. And Bolivia is showing very strong interest in FLEGT. So it's not that we've grounded to a halt, it's actually rather the opposite. And we really do think that FLEGT is designed already and can help us to have a green recovery. It's got everything in place. And again, I'm going to repeat what you've already said. It's got the dialogue with the stakeholders that's in place and has really shown resilience in front of COVID. There's enough ownership and people that are trained and involved and who want to continue to work on this. So we need to really use this infrastructure to build back the green recovery. We think the VPAs really also help build the institutional capacities to address illegalities, to strengthen the systems of checks and balances in the forest administrations, but not only in the forest administrations, because the value of FLEGT is it also gets different administrations around the table that don't necessarily always talk to each other. So, you know, we see really FLEGT as being the cornerstone of everything that we do in the forest sector. But obviously, we want to build on the FLEGT experience, and the EU's proposing that we actually broaden our support and try and make sure that we address all of the multifunctionalities of forests. And in the context of the next MFF, we're looking at working on a holistic and integrated approach to the EU's vision on forests, which really underlines our commitment on poverty alleviation, but also fighting climate change, promoting good governance, improving the human rights, which we've also been able, obviously, to do with VPAs, and protection of biodiversity, and obviously, finally, developing sustainable forest-related value chains. As I was saying, the participation of the different stakeholders is one of the real strengths that we've seen in FLEGT and VPA countries. And it really provides a very good example and foundation for new partnerships that we would like to build on forest governance. We don't want to abandon the FLEGT. On the contrary, we really see it as the cornerstone. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us how, with our counterparts, this journey is really serious, and we need to continue working on governance. And we're confident that both FLEGT and forest partnerships, together with willingness of partners, we can really not only contribute to recovering from COVID, but I think that what we think is that more importantly, if we work on forests with the partners, then we can prevent the emergence of future zoonoses and try and avoid the absolute, you know, disastrous situation that we all find ourselves in at the moment. So that's, you know, that's really my 2 pence worth for this discussion. Thank you, Leah. I'll hand it back to you now.
Thank you, Chantal. And now we will move on to the questions and answers. So I have a number of questions here, which I've been provided from the chat box. So perhaps first to Mr. Director General, there is a question on could you say more about what Indonesia is planning to do to support SMEs with gaining and maintaining the Velca certification, and how do these measures address the pressures from furniture manufacturers in Indonesia?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, of course, Indonesia is in the process of improving policies and regulation to support the continuation of the SVLK, in particular to assist the micro, small, and medium enterprises in timber and wood sector, especially for furniture industries to stay in the business and to increase their export. The improvement of regulation will ease micro, small, and medium enterprises to obtain SVLK certification. For example, we are giving support to capacity building and assessment process to get proof of legality. And then we also reducing the cost of certification for SMEs, and also to support the administration of the SMEs, and also to support the establishment something like a cooperative among the community forest. So we do hope that SMEs can get better condition for doing their business. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question. This could be either for Chantal, or possibly for Karin, how do you see this is in Spanish, so I would assume from Latin America. How do you see the possibility to use an instrument like a VPA for other products that are commercialized in, for example, in Europe, such as palm oil, coffee, or beef? Chantal, would you want to say something on that?
Well, I think that at the moment there's an ongoing study to actually be able to judge whether VPAs or other forms of certification or regulation, you know, just to try and find out what the most appropriate tool is. So I can't really speak to other products. What I can say is that negotiating a VPA for in a way, a very simple product like trees, timber, is a very long process. I don't think we should underestimate that. It takes approximately 7 years to negotiate. So I think we really need to see whether it's the most appropriate tool. And my colleagues in DG Environment are taking that work forward with the consultation and all the analysis that they're currently doing. So I'd really like to see what comes out of the work that they're doing. I don't think we can really pronounce ourselves theoretically, if you see what I mean. We can only talk from our experience on timber, and it's a lot simpler.
Thank you,
May
Chantal.
I say something?
Of course, Karin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's very interesting question, because we are in a situation where we really try to find out how we can use trade as a tool in our common way to a more sustainable economy, and we have to use the most efficient tools in the toolbox. So what can we learn from FLEGT, and what can we which conclusions can we make from the evaluation we do in every step? That's something we have to do now, because I think it's too early to say that we should use that or that system for different kind of products. But what we need to do is to understand that in future we have high expectation on global trade, on international trade standards when it comes to sustainability, and when it's the trade agreements, it's the environmental agreements must walk hand in hand. So I think we should evaluate this from what we can, the results of it, and in future be quite open-minded.
Thank you, Karin. There was actually another question for you, even if you're not the panelist. So if you're willing to take it, there's an interest to know what is the role of the Parliament, the European Parliament, going forward to ensure support for FLEGT is strengthened and proper monitoring from the Parliament and civil society is in place.
I would say that the European Parliament is one important institution to move forward in a FLEGT process. I mean, the political position, the political will of the European Parliament will be, I think, reflected in the European Union policy. And I mean, this is a cooperation between the institution in Europe. So I think that European Parliament plays a very important political role to push and to be a kind of, I mean, driving force, and also it's a framework where we have actually power. So, but we should not underestimate the role we have politically to highlight this topic, to put it on the agenda as well, because I think this is actually to be a little bit, I think we should be a little bit proud of FLEGT. And I think it's one of the best examples that shows that you can find solutions on very complex topics. Sometimes when we talk about globalization and the environmental challenges, it's so huge and so big, so it feels almost impossible to do something, but it is. And this shows how we can move forward together.
Thank you. There is a question for all panelists, but maybe Obed, you can share your thoughts on this one in particular. What can FLEGT processes do to ensure more benefits reach out to local communities, to social protection from them as they recover from this pandemic?
Thank you very much. And I think that is a very, very important question, because what this COVID-19 has shown is that the communities that stay close to the forest are very vulnerable. And when there are crises, they are the worst affected. So I believe what the FLEGT can do, and it has already started doing, is to ensure that provisions within national legislation is enforced. For example, in the case of Ghana, there is a legal provision that every timber company that harvests from a forest needs to pay some percentage of the money to the communities that stay close to the forest. Some of these provisions exist in almost all other countries, and they need to be enforced. By enforcing some of these provisions, you will be supporting communities, and you'll be alleviating some of the burden that COVID-19 will bring to them. Then the other thing is, most of the time, there is a protectionist approach to forest management, where communities are prevented from accessing some of these natural resources in the forest because of national laws. And there needs to be a concerted effort to ensure that communities, especially those who fringe these forest reserves, have access to the natural resource, have access to the forest for non-timber forest products to support themselves. And by doing these things, I believe we will be supporting the communities to come off this COVID-19 a bit less scattered than we suspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Obed. There are many questions on Indonesia, so I would like to pose a last question before we move on to Mr. Director General. The question goes, it's about the Omnibus Bill. How will the new Omnibus Bill passed recently in Indonesia protect and support sustainable forestry, including the timber trade, when the bill is removing some of the laws that protect access to the forest and environmental protection with regard to permits in assessing the forest for land? Could you say something on that?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, at least there are three benefits from the application of the Omnibus Law. That is eliminating overlap between laws and regulation, and then the efficiency of the change, revocation of legislation, and then eliminating sectoral egos contained in various laws and regulations. The substance of the law includes simplification of licensing, and then investment requirement, employment, is empowerment, and protection of small and medium businesses. So there is a focus on that, and also ease of doing business, and also there is a government investment on the project and the economic area, especially for the local community. So I suppose that the Omnibus Law can also help the local community or SMEs to improve their businesses.
Thank you. And there would be many more questions to you on the Indonesia as well as the other panelists, but we do have to move on to give the floor to the second panel. So I want to now invite Mr. Benoit Jobé Duval to take the floor. Benoit, vous êtes toujours avec nous?
Benoit, are you still with us?
Bonjour.
Good
Excusez-moi.
morning. Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Our association is composed of actors that are really trying to help the future of forest by sustainable management. We are in Congo and Ivory Coast, and we are all trying to have a certified legal process. And some of them are also sustainable development certified. We do this through different associations working in Cameroon, Congo, Ivory Coast. We also have other partnerships with different subsidiaries. So we are a good representative of the region. So about the topic of today, the forestry sector is really resilient to the pandemics. In the producing countries, the companies have kept on working, kept on paying taxes, paying the employees, and most of the employees have kept their job. In other sectors of the economy, we see more impacts of the pandemics. This is not the case with the forestry sector. In remote regions where the companies operate, the communities have not been left aside because the private sector has kept working and so supporting these local communities. And we can highlight the fact that the licensed companies have really worked positively for the health aspect of the crisis. These companies have tried to protect their collaborators, but also the local people, so that the entire production keeps working. And this is important for the economic aspect of the country. You have to know that timber production is one of the most important aspects of the economy of the country. Also, you have to say that forestry and logging in the Congo region is one of the major employer after the state. So this means that it is really important on a social point of view. So we could make a few suggestions. Short term, first, you have to support the private sector. The private sector is really committed in processes, in responsible processes. So we have to help fund the cost of these processes, of the companies that have committed themselves to helping for this situation. Midterm now, we have to really assess the negative impacts of COVID-19 on the economy and infrastructure. So we have to support the businesses. As I was saying, we have to support this sector because it is a major employer in the countries at hand. We also maybe need to support a change in taxes to be in accordance with the situation. We see in many countries the raise in taxes, and this is linked with the diminishing returns of the oil trade. However, the forestries cannot replace the money that was produced by the oil industry. So there is a limit to this. If the forestry companies disappear, the local communities will also be impacted. This will have a domino effect in certain regions. These are remote regions where logistics is not good, where health services are not perfect, so we have to support forestries. Another point now, the recognition of the license. For example, in Gabon, before the pandemics, the license was a criteria of legality, amongst other criterion. It should be the case also for the European Union, for environment, social aspects, and others. I think this would really be the right engine of our process. We really congratulate for the Green Deal ambition, and we have to unite forces with the licensing projects. We have to work together. And my last point is this one. There is another virus in forestry. It's illegality. We have to fight against it. We have to acknowledge that this is still a problem in Europe. And everybody knows who are the stakeholders of this illegality. And we talk about it too little in the importing and exporting countries. Madame Karlsbro and other panelists have highlighted that illegality has increased. It might be the case, of course, but it's still, anyway, a major risk. And we all know that during a period of crisis, a time of crisis, some producing tools are abandoned, and so people can use them. So, sincerely, I think that we should really focus on this. It's very important. To conclude, there's a last point I wanted to mention about the Asian companies based in Congo and the region. We have to remind that 55% of the lands used in the region, 50% are at the hands of Asian companies. And in Gabon, in the case of Gabon, it's 65%. So we really have to take into account the new forestry law in China, which has for objective to regulate the importation of timber. So we have to help the Chinese companies to put into place mechanism of legality checks, because their importing are part of this objective. So this was our first thoughts on this topic, and I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you, Benoit.
Now we go straight to our next panelist, Mr. Vice Minister from Honduras. Vamos a Honduras.
We're going now to Honduras, the Vice Minister. Good morning to you all, or good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I would like to explain the importance that the VPA has in order to strengthen governance in the forestry sector. Honduras is a country with with huge forestry vocation. The governance, therefore, of this sector is tremendously important to assure that way the sustainability of this precious resource. 48% of our territory is covered by forest. It's a forest country covered by forest, and we have different spaces. 48% are forests, and but there's also 91 protective areas. There are also, it's very important governance in order to look after water and biodiversity, and as well as and beyond the national territory, we have 4 reserves for man and biosphere. This is not only important for the country but the rest of humanity. In Honduras, there's several serious problems: illegal logging and certain plagues that we have to address during the COVID crisis. I would also like to indicate that our forestry sector contributes hugely to the national GDP. Approximately, in some years, this contribution to the national GDP has been 3.5%, and in some instances, like for example this year, it's approximately 19%. This generates huge employment, especially in rural areas that are surrounded by forests, and approximately 30,000 people live in this sector. Part of our consumption or exports are towards the Caribbean. Very few go to the EU, but we are interested in strengthening governance through legal trade, just trade, a trade that will allow to guarantee that the wooden products, both for internal and external consumption, we can show their traceability and their origin, their legal origin. There is a huge amount of people that live off this sector, and in this moment of crisis, both environmental and sanitary, these people have been able to find an opportunity in forest management to generate employment and to develop their communities, a way to strengthen, if you like. We've seen an opportunity to strengthen our policies, forest policies. We have had a history in Honduras. There's been certain reforms, and part of our forests are managed by communities, indigenous communities or campesinos, people that organize themselves to manage this forestry resource. And with the new forestry law of 2007, it incorporates a national strategy to control illegal logging. Honduras is the first country and say that we're going to publish a type of agreement, a Paris Agreement, which explains the negative impacts. Our agreements, based on the Paris Agreement, it takes into account the sustainability of forest, and been working with this law to strengthen governance, the forestry governance in our country. There is something I would like to reiterate: why Honduras, when we talk. Something very interesting happened in our country. The civil society, the indigenous people, local communities, government institution, we united in order to talk about that we needed to strengthen governance, to improve governance, to talk in a transparent way. In that way, in the last few years, been working in a plan that has allowed us to assure one of the VPA's most representative. Everyone sits around the table with a VPA to dialogue and to advance in a negotiation process. This negotiation take a long time. Someone previously mentioned this takes a long time. We started in 2011, and currently we've been advancing in signing and ratifying certain aspects and constituting constituting the table of legalities, the key KPIs, etc., and different ways to assure legality. This has been a very interesting process. We've had the support of the European Union. 2018 in June precisely, we signed the VPA of Honduras VPA with the president and representatives of the EU. Now we see this as a huge opportunity. Why am I saying this? Because although we have this environmental and health crisis, we've also had the participation of the stakeholders, indigenous people, communities, civil society, private enterprises, base communities, NGOs, as well as the governments. We've all worked with one objective, which is to organize ourselves in order to assure that this VPA takes into account the necessity to advance in an area of huge importance and the way to manage a renewable source, but do it in a sustainable way. All the participants, all the operators have participated in VPA. They've all been able to participate and contribute their opinions in order to improve transparency, and in that way have a country which is open to the civil participation, open as well to construct consensus and to improve constantly governance, because this is something fundamental for the development of a country. I would now like to say that it has not been an initiative by the government as a VPA, where lots of stakeholders have contributed, different platforms, different operators, small, medium-sized companies. Civil society has also been, their contribution has been valuable. The indigenous population has also been empowered in this process. They have hope. They have the hope to improve their own governance, their forestry governance as a consequence of this VPA.
Pasamos, changing the language back to English. Next, we will go to thank you very much to Vice Minister from Honduras for his presentations. And now we move to Central Africa. Orlin and Esilo, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Léa. Sans plus tarder, je vais commencer la présentation que Silo et moi avons préparée sur les enseignements tirés de l'observation indépendante en temps de crise.
Learn from the independent forest monitoring in a time of crisis.
Ok, nous partons déjà d'un constat, c'est que les activités d'exploitation et la perpétration des illégalités ont continué malgré la crise de la Covid. C'est ainsi qu'on peut voir de nouveaux types d'observation, de nouveaux types d'exploitation qui ont été accordés. On s'est rendu compte qu'il n'y a pas eu de fermeture de chantier. Par contre, on a même vu des syndicats d'exploitants qui ont demandé des exonérations fiscales. Ça s'est passé au Cameroun. On a également observé que l'exploitation illégale a continué parce qu'il y en a que la suspension de certains titres d'exploitation par l'administration. Et malgré cela aussi, des restrictions de mission de contrôle des services compétents dues bien sûr aux conditions restrictives imposées pour les déplacements pendant cette crise. Mais à côté de cela, on a observé une quasi-pause des observateurs indépendants. Il faut dire ici que nous avons mené une petite enquête auprès de 15 organisations de la société civile dans le bassin du Congo. Et toutes ces organisations nous ont informé qu'elles ont été impactées par la Covid. 13 d'entre elles ont dû carrément arrêter les activités de terrain et 7 ont accusé un grand retard dans la conduite des activités planifiées. C'est comme ça, on se rend compte que les activités ont carrément été arrêtées et le personnel a été inactif. il y a eu beaucoup de difficultés d'accès aux services administratifs du fait de la fermeture de certains services.
Administrative services because they were simply closed.
Prochaine slide. Okay.
Next slide.
On a également constaté qu'à la suite de notre enquête, que les ressources étaient insuffisantes pour les observateurs indépendants de travailler en période Covid. Surtout qu'il a manqué une stratégie adaptée en période de crise sanitaire pareille. Donc, parmi les organisations que nous avons interrogées, seuls 27% ont pu acquérir des sommes pour supporter les coûts liés à la protection contre la Covid pendant leur travail. Et ceci a également généré un risque d'affaiblissement de l'observation indépendante. Parce que n'ayant pas de fonds pour pouvoir se protéger pendant qu'ils vont sur le terrain ou alors acquérir du matériel nécessaire pour les missions, les observateurs indépendants sont restés carrément inactifs. Donc, si la crise venait à persister et que les OI n'ont toujours pas de fonds nécessaires, on risque de se retrouver avec une chute brutale des missions de terrain et carrément l'arrêt d'activité de plusieurs de ces observateurs indépendants dans la sous-région. Prochaine slide. On a aussi vu que ces observateurs indépendants ont essayé des solutions ad hoc. Notamment, ils ont mis un accent sur des outils technologiques et des plateformes de communication en ligne, notamment pour les formations. Ça, c'est pour le cas de FLEGT, par exemple, qui est spécialisé dans les formations d'observation indépendante. On a également vu la délocalisation de la recherche de l'information, c'est-à-dire que les organisations situées au niveau des centres-villes ont confié un certain travail de collecte aux organisations à base communautaire plus proches des exploitations. Les observateurs ont également jugé important de coupler des missions de sensibilisation aux missions d'observation. Beaucoup d'observateurs dans le bassin du Congo ont fait des observations, des missions de sensibilisation. Ils ont offert du matériel grâce au financement, ceux qui en ont eu de l'Union européenne, la FAO. Il y a également eu évidemment une réduction des équipes de missions pour ceux qui ont pu faire quelques missions pour limiter les risques de contamination. Et bien évidemment, il a été mis en avant les pratiques des mesures barrières pendant les déplacements et les réunions. Beaucoup ont pu mettre en place des plans de contingence et de gestion de risques. Mais pour nous, cela semble encore insuffisant, c'est encore un travail. Donc, les observateurs indépendants auraient besoin d'un appui pour développer et opérationnaliser une stratégie adaptable à des crises sanitaires comme celle de la Covid. Notamment, cette stratégie pourrait intégrer la maîtrise des outils de travail à distance parce que ce ne sont pas tous les observateurs qui ont ce matériel et qui maîtrisent l'utilisation. Il faudrait également continuer à acquérir des équipements barrières contre la COVID-19 pour s'assurer que les missions vont continuer en prenant des mesures de protection. Et bien évidemment, un financement conséquent et flexible sur une longue durée. Ça, c'est un appel à l'Union européenne pour ne pas oublier que soutenir l'observation indépendante qui coûte quand même un peu cher, c'est aussi pouvoir à son financement. Donc, pour la suite, je crois que mon collègue Isilo va continuer. Merci.
Yes, I hope that now the technical problems are solved. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes.
Once again, thank you all. So Pauline just gave you a bird's eye view, and I'm going to tell you about the sub-region. I'm going to mainly focus on my own region, what did we realize? We noticed that in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there is an issue since 2010, since the start, with the other countries of the sub-region, like Cameroon, Congo, Brazzaville, and Central Africa. Until now, during 10 years, we have not been able to have an agreement signed between Congo and the European Union. Even if secondary papers are already available and ready. So we are in a black hole in a way. And the law is not respected yet, even if it is the case in other countries of the sub-region. So it would be important, the negotiations on the actual signing of the agreement to be finalized, such as it was the case in the other countries of the sub-region. In times of COVID, as was said, the independent observer was not able to conduct missions in those regions where there is timber production because of the restrictive measures imposed by the government. And when the lockdown was over, we were able to go to Congolais, which is outside the city of Kinshasa, where the timber, the wood, arrives to be then shipped to the industries. And we realized that the monitoring conducted by the evaluator was not coercive. And today, timber is being purchased and bought just next to the river. And we can see on the islands in the middle of the river that purchasing and buying takes place. And it is made possible because it's obvious. We can see it. In the harbor, for instance. And there is so much things in the harbor that you just can't walk. And 12 new pieces of machinery were installed in the harbor, which means that there is an abundance of timber that attracts the... Could you please close your presentation, says Leah. Yes, I will try to. In spite of this gloomy overview, we realized that the ministry started the discussion on the drafting of forest legislation. It was a good sign. And because of the illegal activities taking place, the ministry adopted a decree to ban the selling in Kigali. And we also saw that all the forest companies did not close their production, even if there was a drop in production and many people lost their job. They were dismissed and let go because of the pandemics. And many other industrialists open account on the account that was put in place by the ministry to ensure transparency.
You were muted, Leah. I still can't hear you, Leah.
Hi, Leah. I can hear you. I think it's just trying to pass it on to Daphne to speak now. So if we can hear Daphne, then it should all be okay.
Hello, yes, I can hear everybody.
Now we can also hear you. So go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I appreciate being the final speaker on this very interesting panel and very excellent afternoon. I will be very brief. I wanted to give a little bit of a higher level overview from the program. The FLEGT program, as we know, supports VPA implementation and FLEGT action plan implementation in all three regions, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And from the, do I have control of this? It's fine. No, sorry, next slide. I'll just jump straight into what I wanted to present was a little bit of our actions, what the FLEGT program has been doing to maintain support during this difficult time, feedback that we've been getting from all of our partners and reflecting a lot of what we've heard today on the two panels, and our observation from this feedback and from our experience on mitigating the impacts. Next. We conducted a media outreach amongst our partners. Many speakers have said that activities have continued, but also the flow of funds has been very important to maintain to our partners across all of the countries where we operate. And we conducted a very rapid survey amongst 120 partners in all regions to get immediate feedback and response and to see how we could continue to support remotely with the challenges that are different and were different in different timeframes and different contexts amongst all of our partners. I wanted to highlight that we as a program have contributed to 2 surveys that go into more detail on impacts of community forestry and at the community forest interface with RECOFT across 7 countries in Asia, and we contributed to CIDT survey, which was also referenced by our previous speakers onto communities in Congo Basin. And we'll be presenting findings on 2 weeks' time in more detail on those community impacts. Next, please. Immediately, we found, as other speakers have referenced, the restrictions in movement did restrict participation, and there was perceived reduced and actual reduction of regulatory presence at the field level and administration processes delayed. The impacts that we have heard and had feedback on our beneficiaries was a significant economic hit and economic loss particularly in MSME, micro, small and medium enterprises, producers producing to domestic market and supplying timber through local channels. This also increased vulnerability to Indigenous peoples and women's groups, including some social pressure, social stress, and increased domestic pressure at community and particularly women reporting this. To get to our key messages and the mitigation measures that we found, I'll focus on the next slide. We really see, as many speakers have referenced, and as we're seeing in the demand from our partners, the need to maintain an independent forest monitoring function and to maintain a flow of information from the field. And this also is maintaining a strong civil society role to keep the participatory process moving forward, as has been emphasized by both of the panels this afternoon. And this ties to what we're finding in the third point, an increased uptake of IT and communication tools. And this has been a move by a lot of our partners, and also it's been referenced throughout the panel that there's an opportunity to modernize. And I think actually everything, including participation, independent forest monitoring, is modernizing the forest sector. But we're finding an increased uptake in remote communication. Obviously, this isn't going to be able to reach all of communities and all the vulnerable groups, but we see this as a very strong opportunity because in the final point that we're making, that there is an opportunity to build on platforms and increase remote connection between buyers, suppliers, particularly promote platforms for exchange of domestic market, increase the tools available to promote legal timber, to give legal timber the benefit of the trade and innovation tools. And as a program, we've been piloting a lot of this support in Congo Basin, in Cameroon, in Honduras, in Colombia, in countries in Asia, where there's been piloting of remote e-commerce tools and tracking tools. And we see that in the strengthening of the forest sector to recover from COVID, this is a real opportunity to build on those experiences learned and the capacity building to date. So that is my take-home message, to strengthen as well the domestic market and not to lose momentum on legality, and build on the opportunities that we have created through strengthening domestic market partners with the increased focus on the need for legality going forward. And I thank the continued commitment of our partners, of the EU and member states, as we direct funds directly to our key stakeholders in all the countries, VPA and in the non-VPA countries. Thank you again for this important event. And to end, some resources that FAO has developed and some discussions that may be of interest. We have had a lot of discussions on positioning forestry for recovery and specific impacts on the forest sector that can all be found in the links here.
Thank you very much, Daphne. We are now already over time, and we haven't even gotten to our second Q&A. So I apologize for that. I hope the panelists of the second panel, if you are available still for a few minutes longer, we can take a couple of questions, and hopefully most of the audience will also still remain with us for this overtime. There is a question from Guatemala in Spanish. This would be for the Honduran Vice Minister, so I will read that in Spanish. Señor Viceministro, si usted está todavía presente.
Mr. Vice Minister, if you're still here, greetings from Guatemala. They are asking how to strengthen the participation of the most vulnerable communities in the implementation of initiatives such as ABA or the VPA. Maybe you have some idea on how to do it. It's very important what Daphne was mentioning, strengthening local consumption, local made produce. We have done it through a new secretariat in the country called Seprende, and it's to promote micro and small entrepreneur, facilitating access to credit and opportunities in the market. Because in spite of this health and environmental crisis, people are consuming. People are needing food. They are needing products at home. Soap, for example. Our agroforestry groups work a lot of resin in order to produce soap, which has a lot of demand during the crisis. So open virtual spaces, and it's possible if there is communications and we can connect local markets, we can help small producers and communities in those areas. Thank you very much for your answer.
And then we have a question in English, but maybe our Central African panelist could respond to this. So the question is, how would you ensure that all relevant stakeholders are fully and effectively participating in FLEGT VPA processes, and that benefits the closer the forest and benefits go to the forest communities and smallholders in timber processing industries? Orline et Silo, avez-vous des idées sur cette question?
Oui,
Vous pouvez répéter la question?
Donc la question c'était comment assurer
the question, how to guarantee that the stakeholders effectively be involved in the FLEGT process, and how to make sure that they would also It should also benefit to the local communities and small producers. I don't know whether Olin should start or I should do it, but I'll try. We need to organize more meetings, rotating meetings in the different provinces. We should try to involve the stakeholders by doing that. I mean, young people, women, private industrialists, civil society. So we need to organize focus groups in each region in order to listen to all the stakeholders and not only to hear people in the center where you don't have representatives of all the communities. So we should listen to all of them. We should hear the point of view of each party. The private sector must have its say. The administration must have its say. The civil society must give its opinion. The scientists must also have a say, because in such an important topic, the politicians would dictate their will because they negotiate the agreement. So they manage. So they tend to impose their point of view. And to avoid that, you should involve as many people as possible throughout meetings, decentralized meetings. I hope that this answered your question. Olin? Yes, I would just add that the participation process should not be confined to a mere consultation, but it should extend to involving them in decision-taking about the final elements of the agreement. So we should lift the level of involvement and participation. For the moment, it's merely some kind of a consultation rather than an actual involvement and a taking into consideration of their points of view in the final decisions on how to manage wood production. So I won't dwell too much at length on this because time is passing by. Thank you. Thank you, Aline. There is still a question to Benoit. When you look at testimonies about the difficulties of indigenous population in Africa or in Latin America, what could the wood producers, which role could they play to guarantee the rights of the indigenous populations in all the countries concerned? But this question is put to Honduras or elsewhere in the framework of the COVID crisis. Thank you. It boils down to what we do in our organization. We gathered companies, certified producers, mainly. And in this certification process, there is some social responsibility commitment. And among the sustainable development certified companies, 5.4 million hectares have been certified as sustainable development territory in the Congo Basin. So there is a high level commitment in terms of dialogue and support of indigenous populations. Without this support, without this dialogue, that there will be no sustainable development certification possible. And the PSC standard, which is being developed, also includes this important commitment. There is no doubt. We promote certification and the legality first, and then certification, of course, because certification is a proof of commitment, multi-level commitment, social responsibility, sustainable development, and legality. Thank you. Thank you, Benoit. One last question. To all the panelists, first panel and the second panel can answer. The question is, to what extent would the European Union and the private sector mobilize themselves to promote a better participation of indigenous populations and of civil society at large in an environment where public space is being restricted because of the COVID crisis, which is used as a tool to restrict the rights under the pretext of fighting against the pandemic. So who would like to answer this question?
Yes, if you allow me, I would like to reply. We have one of the most important biospheres, and we have one of the largest pressures as well. We have to work in a holistic manner because communities live there. They have been there for years and years, surrounded by forestry resources. But what we have done as a country is to assign them the areas so that they are the ones who own them, manage them, and develop them. It's not easy. They are isolated areas, but we have to make this activity not only sustainable, but profitable for them. So we have to empower those communities. The European Union in Honduras has assignated resources through budgetary support. We're working with support from the state so that they help us to build those models on how they have that cosmovision, how they see those link with the forestry. We have to be open and transparent so that communities participate, not only giving their opinion, but building the country processes. So I believe that communities have to be part of entrepreneurship, they have to be beneficiaries. They have to be the ones who transform the forestry products and give it the added value. Thank you very much.
So I think we will have to leave it at this. There would be many more questions, and I'm sure many more interesting answers from our great panelists. There is a final follow-up question that we would like all the panelists to answer in writing, and we would include this in the webinar reporting. And the question goes, what can panelists say about how we deal with the issue of lack of motivation from governments to ensure the success of the VPA implementation? So a little bit of homework for you. You did already great prep work for this. And also the remaining questions will be distributed to the panelists, and we will try and gather as much responses and include that in the report of this event. And now I hand over to Fern, over to Alexandra.
Thank you. Hello, yes, my name is Alexandra Benjamin, and I'm a forest governance campaigner at Fern. On behalf of Fern, I just want to thank our co-hosts, Ms. Karin Karlsbro, EIA, CIDT, and WRI. Also, thank you to our co-moderators at EFI and to our panelists who explain the impacts of COVID-19 around the world, from Honduras to Ghana and Republic of Congo and even to Indonesia, and who were able to provide valuable perspectives on behalf of actors such as government, institutions, industry, and civil society. Thank you as well to all the other participants for raising so many great questions that we will continue to answer, and encouraging us to continue to evaluate the impacts of this pandemic on forest governance processes. And of course, a big thank you to our translators who helped make this event more inclusive and participatory. To wrap up, I would like to remind everyone that the recording of this event will be sent to all participants and shared on our event page. And I will now pass it on to Ms. Karin Karlsbro, who will say the final remarks for this webinar. Thank you.
So, thank you so much. Thank you thanks to everyone. It has been a great pleasure to listen today. This truly shows how the question of sustainable trade and sustainable forest management raises engagement. Forest governance and COVID-19, how can FLEGT support a green recovery from the green recovery? That was the topic for today, and I think we received a lot of answers to this. There are some points I really remember from this afternoon, and one thing is that we can be afraid that the COVID-19 crisis, it could be an excuse for not fulfill the commitments we have done, but we have to shake hands and not let it be an excuse. I would say that it has never been more important than to fulfill and to improve our common commitments. My take-home message from today is that FLEGT is a concept and a tool in a greater toolbox to improve sustainable trade. And I also think that an important take-home message from today is that we have to improve the cooperation between all stakeholders. And of course, the civil society plays such a key role in this. I would also underline something we should not forget, and that is that the need and the potential of using new methods in the cooperation. I think I heard many good examples of how digitalization can improve digital trade and the cooperation in the FLEGT concept. And that's, I think, very optimistic also in this time when we need to be very creative to find solutions. There are so many things I would like to add, but the time is so short, and the only thing I can say that we have to meet again because we had enough time, but I really hope that there will be new possibilities soon to continue this very important and inspiring discussions. And I will also thank you all participants, the panelists, and everyone who had been involved in the preparation in this seminar, this webinar, and to the interpreters, of course. Looking forward, meet you soon again. Thank you very much. Merci à tous.